Hey everyone, I am magically reappearing on YouTube to give you kind of like a replay of a recent free event that I hosted for Habitat Interiors Co. called Your Home is an Ecosystem. And I wanted to make this for two different reasons. One, I wanted to share some of the information on YouTube so other folks could have access to it. But two, I wanted to make sure that instead of sending out like an hour-long recorded replay of the content, people could kind of just have a shortened version so they didn't have to put me on like 2x or what have you to go back and reference the material, especially because I also gave them a free worksheet within the event to be able to actually go and experiment some of the changes that we're going to talk about today. So here I am coming back to YouTube to inject this condensed version of the webinar that I just hosted. So this webinar that I hosted called Your Home is an Ecosystem was mainly a reflection practice with some different prompts to try and figure out what areas of your home or your space you might not be able to like put a finger on that you dislike. Maybe you can feel that the vibe is off, but you're kind of just struggling, like, what do I need to manipulate here to actually make it feel better? And so I'm going to give you a few different like terms from like design psychology that we can kind of like interrogate our spaces with, and also give you some different ideas to either reduce some of those barriers or to kind of inject encouragers into the space so you're actually interacting or feeling better in your space than you were prior. So first, let's talk about what ecosystems are and why they're kind of being applied into our homes. Because, you know, when we think of ecosystems, we think outside, right? And we're indoors for the way that we're applying this information today. And the reason I want to think about this is because what an ecosystem is, if you weren't like an Animal Planet nerd like I was as a kid, an ecosystem is kind of like both living organisms, so like humans, pets, what have you, plants in a space, and how they also interact with the non-living things in their space. So like this chair, for example, or the candlesticks in the background, the stove, whatever it is, as it pertains to our homes, and how these things interact to kind of like support the life in that space. There's this thing called symbiotic relationships in habitats and ecosystems, where essentially these different components of mostly living organisms, but again, today I think that we can focus on all the components of our house, so objects as well that are inanimate, how those like relationships work. So there's four main different relationships. The two symbiotic relationships that we're trying to move towards are commensalism and mutualism. And the commensalism one is when one side of this relationship is benefiting and the other one is more like unaffected or neutral. And mutualism is when both parties are benefiting from the relationship. Now, on the flip side, there are two kind of more negative relationships within an ecosystem or in symbiotic relationships, which is competition and parasitism. So competition are when, you know, those two parties are kind of, I don't want to use the word competing again, but like in contest for resources or social status or what have you. And parasitism is when one party is actively being harmed and the other one is actively benefiting. So competition is kind of like a double negative, and parasitism is kind of like a plus negative relationship. So what we're going to do today is kind of look at those two more negative relationships and see if there's something that you can identify in your space that kind of falls under that category, and how can we get it over to a more positive or like healthy space. So the way that you're interacting with your home, whether that's other people or living things within your space, or just kind of the things that make up a home, can better support you. And the thing that I want to stress about symbiotic relationships is that they do help us access our different needs And so I also want to talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So I think that this is like pretty common framing for a lot of like social science nerds. So this is like my happy spot with my psychology background. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is essentially a pyramid where at the very bottom you have kind of like your most basic necessities, things that you absolutely need for survival. And as you climb the ladder up, these are kind of more like frivolous things or things that don't, they're not completely necessary, but it gets you closer to self-actualization, which is kind of like what we think of as like peak human experience essentially. And I think that the very top like section of self-actualization is where a lot of like interior design is kind of perceived to be in, like the idea of beauty and aesthetics. However, I think that the home design that I try to focus on actually hits like almost every single one of these different sections of the pyramid. So I want us to take a more comprehensive look of like how can our homes actually support all these different needs that we have: social, esteem, safety, and the self-actualization piece. And how can we actually intentionally and consciously design our spaces so it best supports you? In no means am I trying to say that your home should absolutely fulfill every single one of your needs and you don't need to be looking at other places to get these needs fulfilled, because it's good to have our needs filled in a diverse way, right? However, I do think that especially during this time of like a lot of chaos and overwhelm, our homes can be that place that like we retreat to and find a lot of comfort and almost like refuel us for other things that we have going on in our life that can fill our cup or sometimes also kind of deplete us. Okay, so now that we kind of got through a bunch of like the definitions of things, I want to introduce this concept called the Norman door. And so I want to know, have you ever gone to open a door at like a commercial space and it has a handle that's like vertical, you go to swing it or pull it towards you, and then you realize that you're supposed to push the door? This is what a Norman door is. It's essentially counterintuitive design, specifically in like door form. And so what I'm wanting us to do today is to hopefully identify what these Norman door things are in our spaces. So what is maybe like just not functioning the way that we would like it to, and see if we can come up with some creative ideas to inject better ways to have intuitive design. At this point, we kind of went through an activity to reflect on a space that we don't like. So thinking about what are the interactions, the behaviors, the feelings that come up in whatever space that you're not currently being fulfilled by. A lot of complaints that I hear about pre-existing spaces that aren't working well for people have to do with two main things. One is circulation. Maybe they have too much furniture, not enough furniture, or it's just like really hard to get around in the space, or it doesn't make sense how to move through the space. And the second one is essentially clutter or like a lack of storage. And so we're going to talk about these two main things that I hear time and time again people complain about. So when it comes to circulation, there are a few things that I want to talk about. One is desire paths. And I'm gonna read you Robert McFarlane's, like kind of his way of describing, because I think it paints a fun picture. Desire paths. Paths and tracks made over time by the wishes and feet of walkers, especially those paths that run contrary to design or planning. And if you are ever on a university campus, or you go to a park, or anywhere where there's kind of like grass or foliage, then you'll most likely be able to identify like, oh, that's a desire path. Essentially, a desire path is just any path that's kind of been worn in by people walking over it again and again. There's two main reasons why desire paths typically exist. One of them is because our curiosity or interest is piqued by something that's not on the trail. So maybe the trail is kind of having us go towards this green field, not nothing really interesting happening, but we see these trees off the path and we kind of want to like explore through that. Or instead of our interest being piqued, it might just be that there's something beyond where I'm currently headed that it would just be a lot more efficient to kind of go diagonal essentially and cut off a bunch of my time and energy from kind of going the traditional route. And another term that I want to talk about is wayfinding, which is really common in a lot of commercial design. For example, like hospitals and airports, this is utilized a lot, but you'll see in other places as well. So what is wayfinding? It's pretty much trying to orient and direct people like how to move through a space to kind of reduce anxiety and increase accessibility. So you're kind of encouraged to have a better experience of the place instead of just kind of like guessing, where am I supposed to go from here? So some really direct examples of this. One, signs that say like, if you go left, this is where you end up. If you go right, this is where you end up. In airports, it's really important to have really direct communication as far as like signage and where people need to go, because there's a lot of people that speak different languages or just have cultural different norms. And so trying to be as direct as possible is helpful. And people are really stressed when they travel typically, and so this kind of reduces anxiety as long as it's clearly communicated. I found this really kind of fun example of these different colors on floors, and if you follow the red line, then it takes you to Westminster, and if you follow the blue line, it takes you somewhere else. That's still a pretty direct way of kind of guiding someone to the path that they or the destination that they're trying to find. And I think in our homes, we can use wayfinding as a technique, but incorporate it in less direct ways. So there's two main ways that I suggest to do this. One is in lighting and one is in artwork. So I think that it's really easy to intentionally place lighting to kind of guide someone through a space. Usually, like, especially if you think of something like dark, if it's nighttime, it's not very inviting when somewhere is like completely dark, right? Light is a great way to kind of like direct someone's attention and encourage them to move through the space that way. You just kind of have to create a path. Another way you could do this is with art. So again, kind of like using that same desire path idea of like creating interest in something. Artwork is usually something that people will notice very quickly and want to gravitate towards. So using that to kind of like lure attention or direction for people to move through the space. Okay, now I want to address clutter, and I like to think of clutter as visual noise. If the sound and the volume is turned really high up, we might want to bring it down, and if it's like silent, that can also be uncomfortable, and maybe we want to turn it up. And I think extreme maximalism design and extreme minimalism design are kind of two ways to think about this, right? How does clutter like psychologically affect us? It can really discourage behaviors and create avoidance. And the example that I gave in the workshop was actually about my kitchen behind me. I've really gotten into cooking the last few years, and I will look forward to cooking, but if I get into my kitchen and I see like the sink is full of dishes or the pot that I need to use is still like out because we haven't cleaned it from the last time that we cooked, I'm automatically going to avoid this thing that I want to do, which is cooking, because I recognize that there is more labor involved in that activity than I want. What I would like to do is just go straight to cooking, but I was maybe too lazy beforehand to actually do the things to take care of my kitchen, clean it up, so I could just jump into that activity. So kind of going back to this idea of maximalism and minimalism design, again, if we like crank the noise all the way up to 100 and we are calling that maximalism design, that can feel really overwhelming. we stay in an overwhelming situation for too long, it's really hard for us to regulate ourselves. And so this can lead to stress, nausea, dizziness, headaches, essentially symptoms that we don't necessarily want to self-induce, right? And then if we turn the volume really far down on visual clutter and we go to extreme minimalism, that can be a space that is extremely underwhelming. So we get bored, disinterest, numbing, emptiness. One thing that I find really interesting about minimalism design is like, we'll start like whispering or being really quiet in this space. And that's because we realize like there is a lack of things in this space to absorb the noise. So me talking at a normal volume is going to travel a lot further. So if we were to turn this visual noise dial to right in the middle and be kind of, to me, I view the goal as just like, what is stimulating? And I'm not trying to demonize maximalism or minimalism design, because you can absolutely do these design styles successfully. And it totally depends on like your personality. Whatever design style you like, the goal should be that it's stimulating, because that's going to nourish your psychological and cognitive responses. And a great example for me personally, of what like a stimulating design might be would be like incorporating mosaic tiles. There's kind of like a repetitive pattern to it, but it's complex enough but it's interesting enough for me to want to kind of, I'm intrigued by it. I want to look at it. I kind of want to dissect the pattern and the way the colors are rearranged within the pattern. So to me, mosaic tile is like a great example of something that is stimulating for me. Now, kind of reflecting on spaces that you do enjoy, whether that's in your house or maybe it's a coffee shop nearby or any space really that you enjoy. What are some of the interactions, the behaviors, the feelings that come up for you in that space that maybe are kind of the desired things that you want in this space you don't enjoy? So essentially, what are the clues that we can take from the spaces that we enjoy to infuse some of those things into what we want to improve of spaces that we don't enjoy? And this is like not to judge ourselves too harshly. Like, let's say it's poor circulation that you kind of identified in your space. This doesn't necessarily mean that you need new furniture, but what it might be signaling is that you need a new configuration or arrangement of furniture, things in the space. And if you're more in the camp of clutter, this doesn't necessarily need to be like a moral thing, like a judgmental thing on you as a person being lazy. Like, just because I didn't wash all the dishes after the last time I cooked doesn't mean that I'm lazy. It just means that maybe I need a better system in place. Like making sure that I clean the dishes the next morning if I'm just feeling too tired to cook and then clean the dishes right away. Hopefully we've kind of identified like what is our Norman door, or the thing that is our counterintuitive design elements in our space. Now that I've kind of thrown some different things at you that maybe you're experiencing in that space that you don't fully enjoy, hopefully you can think of like that Norman door visual and have identified your kind of like equivalent in your room. So what do we want to water now that we kind of have these ideas happening? So let's use the function of what we're wanting to really drive the direction of how we want the space to behave, and also the aesthetics. So a really great example is if you're trying to do more of a certain hobby, let's say that you like hand building pottery. Instead of like having all of your stuff tucked away in a closet and it's really clunky to access it, and so there's that friction to you doing that behavior or hobby because you have to do this whole process of getting everything out, and there's a lot of steps to starting, then what if you kind of put together like a pegboard that's more like on display in your space wherever you're trying to utilize your hobby? And this takes out a lot of steps to getting started, so it's going to encourage you to do it more often. But then also it kind of adds this aesthetic value to your space. Not everyone is going to think that this is like a great, beautiful design necessarily. However, I think that a thing that a lot of homes can lack is incorporating like your actual values, routines, hobbies, beliefs, that sort of thing. And so this really puts it like on display. And I think just the letting people in to see like what you enjoy has this inherent like likability factor, even if it's not always the prettiest thing. Now, I think that it like you can definitely make it look good by having kind of like the way you arrange things. And so I don't know, I think that this is like an interesting idea to kind of help both these habits and kind of have a point of view in your design. Okay, and then I'll also give you a few ideas and examples from my own space. So my living room here that I'm kind of currently sitting in is very much designed and oriented towards the TV, which is over here. And I am not a huge TV person, and I want to not be. I think a lot of us are trying to like distance ourselves from our phones or our TVs or screens in general, and kind of like interested in more like analog activities. And I've always been a big reader. However, whenever I was in this space, I rarely went to grab my book. I usually would, I don't know, eat and watch TV or watch YouTube or whatever. So I made this really minor change that has really helped me kind of stay off, maybe not stay off the TV, that sounds weird, but like encourage me to read more. And it's incorporating this chair specifically. I typically use this in the office. However, when I'm not working, I place it kind of almost next to the TV, but in a direction where I'm not facing the TV. And I put my book, my book's right there, usually like sitting right on top of the chair. And this is just a really easy like visual reminder of like, oh yeah, that's an option. I want to read right now. And when I have a spare, few minutes, instead of getting on YouTube, going on my phone, whatever, it's a really easy invitation. And not only an invitation, but it's really easy to like accept the invitation of reading, because I've kind of associated this chair in this spot. I put the book here, so it's just like a no-brainer that it's easy to start. So obviously it has like a good functional component there to encourage a behavior. However, like I also think that our living room space aesthetically looks better with a chair in that place, because it's a small space and we don't have a ton of room for seating. So it kind of feels just like it completes the design as well, to have another area to sit. Okay, and the last example is, like I said, I've enjoyed cooking more the last few years, and I've made a whole video on like why I don't love all of the design of my kitchen in this apartment. And in that video, I talk about how those cabinets are way too tall for me, and I really can't reach a lot in my kitchen. So it wasn't always easy to cook, because then I would have to bring these bar stools all over to be able to reach pots and pans and, the different things you need when you're cooking. And so I spent a great $25 on this stool over here. I love it so much because it's secondhand. I got off Facebook Marketplace. It's completely like solid wood. It's handmade. It has a funny little owl cut out on the top, which actually is also weirdly functional because it's really easy to move it by just putting my hand in the owl. And it's like almost 50 years old, I think. I can't remember the exact date that it has. Actually, I guess I can look. So whoever made this, sweet person, made by Chuck Grace for Brian and Dina, July 24th, 82. Okay, so I guess closer to 40 years than 50, but still not too far from 50, I guess. Anyway, so again, this is like a very functional piece that I found, so it's easy for me to cook. But honestly, I think that it looks adorable sitting over there, and it brings me a little joy to like, when I look at this weird little owl, and I don't know, it's a pretty cute stool. Some things I'm hoping that you're taking away from watching this video, or if you were an attendee of the event, is that suboptimal design does not need to equal like a personal failing by any means, or a shortcoming, but we want to use them as clues. So remember the Norman door. Like, I think that this is a beautiful way of showing, like, this is a dumb design. It's not you. You're not dumb for trying to pull open the door that we're kind of like programmed to think like a horizontal handle is to pull. It's just bad design. And so I want to really reinforce that idea. There's nothing wrong with you. We just want to design around whatever your obstacles are. Next, I really want to just invite you to reflect on your space and think about like, what are ways that I can explore supporting my well-being? Whether that's like, yeah, trying to distance yourself from your screens, or have better access to your hobbies. What are the different things on Maslow's hierarchy of needs that my space can support me in attending to my various needs? I'm not sure that that was like a super short version, but I hope that you found this video helpful. If you want to learn more about my work and how I incorporate these different ideas of design and psychology, I hope that you go visit my website, or consider coming to one of my other free upcoming events. I currently have one scheduled for March and April, and I will likely continue doing them on a monthly or maybe bi-monthly basis. Completely free to attend. And yeah, if you made it to the end, I guess let me know if there's anything interesting in this video that you learned about. I know that I kind of like threw some different ideas and concepts at you. So yeah, I'd love to hear what's sticking with you. I'm trying to remember how I usually like wrap up my videos. I don't know. I don't know. Thank you so much for watching, and I guess maybe you'll catch me soon on YouTube again. Okay, bye. Oh, actually, if you caught on to all of the technical issues that I was having throughout this video, I guess this is just what happens when you take a long time from filming. So thank you for bearing with me. Land path, and then grass, for example, want to pick apart, because you can absolutely do these design styles